effectively, we're London-based. We're an ETF issuer. We set the company up in 2019, and the idea was to build an entire business around thematic investing. So we've seen a lot of themes come to the fore as a result of the pandemic, but this was happening pre-pandemic. Pre-COVID, we had a number of different themes that were catalyzing in publicly listed companies, including robotics, cybersecurity, cloud computing. If you go even broader than that, software as a service. And I think what's happened with the pandemic is the digital transformation that was already happening has just massively accelerated. So what that has meant is that a lot of the themes that were bubbling under the surface have come to the fore. So what we do in a nutshell is we look for these themes and we create investable funds or ETFs to access these themes. So at the moment we have 4 themes available that people can invest in. One of them is cybersecurity, which I mentioned, and the other 3 are education technology specifically, sustainable food, and medical cannabis. So that's what we do. We're constantly on the lookout for new investment areas, and I think people can continue to expect that we'll be launching further products in 2021.
Just tell us how do you come upon these themes and why pick those 4?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with cannabis. It's always a little bit of wink, wink, nudge, nudge when you talk about this theme, but it's been one of these areas that we've been watching for the last 5 years. We wanted to build a product on it for a really long time. From the European perspective, however, it's been much more difficult to figure out a way to make these companies investable. So the market sort of was catalyzed by Canada with the broader legalization, and they subsequently legalized even recreational cannabis in late 2018. So that's effectively resulted in a lot of companies coming to the public markets for capital. And some of them have grown into quite big names and that are well known in the industry today. From a European perspective, the opportunity isn't investable yet, or the recreational opportunity isn't investable yet for a number of legal and regulatory reasons. So what we wanted to do was focus in on the medical side of it. Okay, what's happening on the pharmaceutical cannabis side, and how do we build a compelling investment proposition for the European market in these companies? Now we take a company like GW Pharma, which is in our fund. This is a company that 4 years ago wasn't even particularly well known. Suddenly in 2018 they get a drug called Epidiolex approved by the FDA, available for public distribution in the US, addressing 2 very specific forms of childhood epilepsy. And suddenly this company comes to the everybody's heard of this company. They get an interview on CNBC with Jim Cramer. Now the CEO is on CNBC all the time, so now everybody's aware of this company. And now this sort of what's happening in the pharmaceutical cannabis space suddenly becomes interesting to every single pharmaceutical company on the planet, because suddenly you have a use case for a particular type of cannabinoid, in this case CBD, and everybody gets interested. And so what you've seen is a lot of companies that may or may not historically have focused on this area moving into this area. You've also seen a lot of new companies come to the market focused on this area. So we saw an opportunity sort of catalyzing there in 2018, and the idea was, okay, how do we capture this in a fund? And we built the fund in the same way as we build all of our funds. We find a sector expert, a thematic expert, so to speak, and we work with them to develop an investment strategy. And we then turn that investment strategy into an index, because we're dealing with ETFs. And then we create an ETF to effectively replicate or track that index. So it's a little bit of a 3-prong approach, but that's what we always do. We'll do that for all of our themes. So that's kind of the cannabis story. And that was the first fund we launched as a business, because we really felt that there was an opportunity. There was something going on here that merited the attention of investors. The second product that we launched was our cybersecurity fund. Now, with that one, we've actually launched a cybersecurity fund in the past, and we felt that that fund, the one we previously launched, which still exists, by the way, needed an update. And what we wanted to do was focus in on a couple of different areas that were catalyzing in the cybersecurity space. One was cloud security. The other one was identity access management specifically. The really interesting thing about identity is that it's very closely tied to data privacy and digital privacy. And we felt like there was a big wave of privacy type of products coming. The third element was AI and machine learning and how those technologies are now being deployed into cybersecurity to move towards predictive types of security. So figuring out where threats may occur and addressing them in real time in a predictive way, as opposed to, here's a vulnerability, let's plug it, which is a little bit like kind of the traditional old school cybersecurity was a little bit like lawyers chasing ambulances, right? It's been, now we're moving towards a world where it's all about predictive analytics and everything's in the cloud and it's all the endpoints are secure, the network's secure. So very different types. So we felt like the older product we built needed an update. That's what we did. And what we're doing is we're looking for the most innovative players in the cybersecurity space, companies that are effectively securing our data, our networks, our endpoints, whether they're doing that for people, corporations, or governments. We're pretty agnostic. We're just interested in the best companies. So that's cybersecurity. The education technology one is an interesting one. It's a very much it's a demographic play for us. We wanted to have a product that was much more EM oriented, and this seemed to be the perfect choice because what we've seen over the last couple of years is a shift towards ongoing education and people recognizing that robots and automation is slowly going to be job destructive. And whatever you're doing today, that job may or may not appear, still exist 10 years from now. So it's all about reskilling and upskilling yourself constantly to make sure that you have the skill set needed to remain relevant in the workforce. So what we've noticed over the last couple of years was a lot of companies coming to the market and effectively offering solutions. These kind of solutions that when you're a 29-year-old chap working somewhere, you get made redundant. Okay, you can now go online and pick up some new skills, whether it's a high intensity course where you learn how to code, or whether it's leadership skills because you've just been promoted. We felt like there was a broad suite of companies kind of appearing on the market. A lot of them were Asian companies because a lot of those companies, given the vast population in China and India, are focused on sort of childhood education. In the West, those same companies are more focused on the workforce side. So we felt like there was a broad enough basket to put some of these names together and create a compelling investment proposition. I think what's really interesting is we were talking about this product in 2019 and then COVID happened. And now you have a situation where every single university student around the world is contemplating the merit of spending 4 years of their lives, as well as lots of money, as well as paying the tuition costs of higher education. Is that truly worthwhile if the education I am receiving is just 1 hour a day over Zoom? Or are there better alternatives out there? And so in an incredible way, I think you've seen this theme being catalyzed by COVID this year. And I don't believe that we're going to see in 2020 students rushing back to university, because I think there's going to be a realization, or there's already been a realization, we believe, that this is a little bit of a cost benefit analysis that these people have been able to do. And I don't think every student who was at university is necessarily going to see the value in that. Maybe they'll see more value in learning directly in a job And I think what we'll see over the next couple of years are also corporate universities, where companies like Google will effectively just come to the market with a university, training people directly into the roles that they need people for. And I think you also see that, funnily enough, in an area like cybersecurity, which has a shortage of cybersecurity professionals. You'll see some of these bigger cybersecurity players coming and launching courses where people can come and effectively train themselves to equip themselves with the skills needed to go directly into those specific jobs where there are gaps. So that's education. Food is another one, and we all talk about veganism. We've all heard the words vertical farming. We've all heard the words, people and very much smarter people than me talk about things like precision farming. And I think what we've been trying to figure out for a pretty long time is how do we capture these products in a holistic way these companies in a holistic way into an investment product. And so this is probably our broadest product. It covers 9 different subsectors, and it goes all the way from the production side. I mentioned precision farming, water irrigation, the agri-tech side, vertical farming, everything in between, supply chain technology, packaging, and then all the way to the consumer side. Organic flavors and ingredients, food safety and testing, plant-based foods. And so the idea was, okay, let's look at the entire value chain of food, and let's find the areas of greatest innovation, and then let's invest in those companies inside one investment vehicle, as opposed to launching 9 different products, which would have been challenging, I think, because you end up with how do people know what to invest in? I think the food theme itself is quite broad. We see it getting much bigger as more people recognize that what they eat is fundamentally connected with things like climate change, biodiversity loss, the heating of the planet. All the things we hear about. And you don't need me to say this, right? You have David Attenborough on TV, every 3 months, putting out a documentary, talking about specifically this. And the food system is completely interwoven with some of the challenges the planet faces right now. And I think we can do a lot by changing the way we consume and produce food. And really, the idea here was, how do we back those companies? Because these are the companies that, in many cases, don't exist in index funds. They don't exist in active funds. How do we map them? And how do we create a source of capital for these companies? So this is really our first foray into sustainable thematic investing. And we'll probably make more steps into that area as time goes on.
On that side of things, how's that translated in the industry? How's it been supported, and who are you aiming to get in front of with that particular product?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is an industry that ultimately needs more institutional capital, and this is one of the reasons for the ETF. And of course, it's a way to channel capital to people who understand and see the opportunity. So I think the first point of call, for us is always the institutional investors. Now, the big challenge in Europe has been that people tend to assume that our product invests in recreational cannabis companies as well. So, and this is typically, most compliance officers, when they're looking at the suite of products available, they will just blacklist anything related to cannabis. The interesting thing is that our product and the companies within it is actually a more focused carve out of traditional pharmaceutical exposure, right? So this should, if somebody has a view on pharmaceutical cannabis, this is a product that should sit alongside any sort of biotech, pharma, healthcare allocation. And it shouldn't be all in your portfolio, because it's a much more targeted view. But if somebody has a strong view from a market perspective here, that this industry is going to be bigger than it is today, then this is a product that may serve utility in that kind of allocation. So for us, the institutional market is crucial. Now, the other aspect of this is one of the things that I think investing has generally failed at is that it hasn't made investing um, understandable, relatable, and meaningful enough. Right? It's kind of failed on all of those three fronts. It's always been, here's an active guy. He's really good at picking stocks. Back him. He knows what he's doing. And I think increasingly people are recognizing that some of these active managers perform, but others don't, right? So what's the alternative when I buy an active guy who doesn't deliver? What alternatives do I have? Well, many of those people are turning to ETFs, and they're perhaps doing so via some sort of model portfolio, or they're doing so directly themselves through their trading accounts. And for those people, a lot of people probably want to do that, but are unable to do that. And the reason is the product suites just have been too sophisticated. You have all kinds of products coming to the market, and it's almost like the product providers are just competing with each other, to create the most sophisticated, complex products, and just trying to outdo each other. And it's just resulted in this, marketplace of tons of confusing stuff. And I think what we wanted to do was effectively bring that back to basics a little bit, um, and but still do so in a meaningful way, right? So look at what are the next, what are the future sectors, what are the future areas of innovation, and how do we tap into those in a investment vehicles that invest in publicly listed companies. So for us, it was really about, let's think about the future. Let's think about the areas that will be exciting for people and that will make investing fun, relatable, and meaningful ultimately. Because, like you said, there's other people like your in your family. I've members in my family who are also using CBD, and it's helped them. And so, this, as much as it's an investment opportunity, it's also something that might, be extremely relatable to people. And, where you're where you're backing companies that you see value in that way. I think investing becomes something else. It's not just purely about, generating 30% a year, although that's great. Um, it becomes about, okay, I can now put my capital to work, and I can understand where that, what's happening with that capital in sort of real time, because you also get a lot of insights on the companies that we're investing in. One of the big things we're focused on is kind of educating the market about these themes and why they deserve, more investment capital. So
It does concern me, particularly in financial services. Somebody's sitting there talking about their life savings, and um, you do an electronic transfer, and you do an e-signature, and everything's online. This is a really vital time to get this cyber stuff right, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. It's probably never been more important. You have a theme, a very broad theme like digital transformation, which has, been um, accelerated by the pandemic. You have a situation where a transformation that was going to occur over 10 years, probably happening in 2 to 3, maybe 4 years. Um, and what that means is, I mean, we don't believe that people are going back to working the same way they used to. I think a year into this, I think we're moving into a very different environment. I don't think it's going to be completely digital either. I think it'll be some sort of hybrid environment where people will have the choice to, or maybe they'll spend some days a week working from home, some days a week working from the office. You'll have these little office pods, wherever you go. And I think that flexibility will change the very nature of the organization of the companies, right? There'll no longer be, single office building, single network, X number of endpoints. Here you're going to have distributed companies, multiple little office pods, all around potentially the country, and thousands, and if not millions of endpoints. When you're working from home, not only are your corporate devices connected to your local network, but all of your personal devices are connected to that network. So you have an environment where to get into a corporate network, somebody can hack your personal device because it's connected to the same network which you're using to log into your office files.
Yeah, yeah.
So in a distributed network environment, the need for new types of cybersecurity solutions, and again, cybersecurity isn't a new industry, right? We think of, I mean, the first cyber attack dates back to 1986, but it was very different back then. And we can spend a long time talking about John McAfee and his sort of escapades, but he kind of pioneered this industry with McAfee. And McAfee actually went public this year, so it's interesting that almost almost more than 30 years later, this company goes public. But I think what we've seen is that the environment is shifting quickly. The more things go digital, the more data we use, the more data intensive companies become. The more you need governance processes around that, the more you need to secure that data, the more you need to secure the networks and that house the data. And I think a lot of what we'll see going forward um, is cybersecurity companies on the one hand becoming increasingly like SaaS players. So rather than software as a service, security as a service, I think a lot of them have already, if not will, adopt that model. I think the other trend we'll see is as everything moves to the cloud, pretty much every cybersecurity company will become a cloud security company. And the ones that fail, they'll drop out of the universe and they might go bust. But that's the big trends we're seeing. And I think the other part of that is how do we use the technologies available today, like machine learning, and make security better? Because I think it's as we moved into these environments, it's never been more cheap or easy for the nefarious ordinary guy or criminal or whatever it is to launch and carry out cyber attacks. You can buy cyber attack kits for $200 on the dark web. So there are people that are training themselves right now to carry out cyber attacks. One of the really funny elements of this trend is how some of these bigger cybercrime organizations have actually metamorphosed into what I can only describe as enterprises. You now have dedicated call centers to help people that have been attacked by ransomware. So you might have been, let's say you get attacked by some sort of ransomware. It asks you to pay $100 to unlock your computer. You can actually call a number and it will go to some call center somewhere in the world, and you can actually negotiate, believe it or not, the ransom payment as well with the person on the other end. And there's actually stories of this in the web where companies have managed to negotiate the ransom payments. So these criminals are organized, but they're also open to haggling. So it's an interesting dynamic.
But I'm interested. You mentioned ideas for 2021. Have you got anything up your sleeve that you can share with us?
I have to obviously be a bit careful with kind of really revealing too much. It's a notoriously competitive space, and we've the ETF world in itself, and I think we are very careful about publicizing what we're working on. But what I can say is we're working on 3 new ideas. We are interested in more sustainable themes. And there's the sort of obvious areas that we're focusing on at the moment, which are broadly to categorize. Demographics is a great there's some great investment areas within demographics. We think there's some great investment areas within energy, and we also think there's some great investment areas within healthcare. So some of our thinking is there, not all of our thinking is there. Some of the products might be 2022 products or 2023 products, but that's kind of how what we're thinking about at the moment. We're hoping to be able to bring some new products to market by the summer of next year. It does take a long time to launch these products. So yeah, that's what, if you're interested in thematic investing, look out for some new launches from us, probably around the summertime at the earliest.
Let's talk about your your food offering. What's it? Forgive me. Remind me what it's called, um, and then let me ask you a couple of questions about it because I'm really interested in this side of things, and also um, I'd value your opinion on some of the ESG stuff generally as well. So, what's it called? Tell me a little bit about it again.
Sure, it's the Rise Sustainable Future of Food UCITS ETF. The ticker is food, so nothing too creative there. Um, and the product itself, it invests in 9 different areas. So we're tapping into things like plant-based foods, precision farming, food safety. Um, we're also investing in supply chain technology companies, water technology companies, sustainable packaging. So it's an all-encompassing portfolio across the food value chain, and the subsectors really are the areas of innovation that were immediately noticeable to us, and were noticeable and investable in publicly listed companies. So this is really important, right? There's a lot of areas within the sustainable food ecosystem which are being catalyzed more in the private markets than in the public markets. So you cannot just create a product that's blanket everything relating to food. The theme, of course, is sustainable food, but then within that you have to find the right areas, which often means finding the right companies to put capital behind. And so that's really what that product is about. We think there's multiple trends there, everything from agri-tech to plant-based eating to what that type of eating means for the climate. And you mentioned ESG there. This is it's one of those words that we tend to not use anywhere in the work we're doing. And the reason is, um, we just feel like it's been hammered to death. It's one of those areas that I think is extremely important, and they will become part of what every single fund manager does. So within, I think, 24 months. And so what's really important to us first and foremost is this an investable theme that has longevity and in which we have conviction. I think the second step is, where there are sustainable themes, are they investable, but is there enough of a growth opportunity there to merit the creation of a product? And what's really interesting these days is, with the government incentives, with the capital flowing into these types of companies, for us, the most interesting thematic opportunities are actually the ones that are inherently sustainable. So rather than us going and creating, some MSCI World index ETF that deletes, that removes companies in controversial weapons and tobacco and alcohol, why not actually do a bottom-up approach and find the winners, right? Pick the theme and then pick companies into the theme, as opposed to, here is a negative screen applied on top of the MSCI World. I think that is the proper and appropriate way, for us at least, to do thematic investing in a sustainable way, or sustainable investing in a thematic way.
How do you kind of pick? Because I think there's obviously a lot of money to be made in this industry. How do you kind of differentiate and pick these within a
Yeah.
sustainable ETF? How do you do that?
Yeah, sure. So we actually exclude from our fund anything exposed to land-reared meats. We don't think it's sustainable. Now that doesn't mean that the view for us is everybody needs to stop, become a vegan. I think that would be mistaken. The view, however, is that people, this is as much, investing alone is not going to solve the food crisis, right? It has to be consumer driven. And so the reason, our fund exists in the first place is because consumers have changed how they spend money on protein. So they've backed companies like Beyond Meats, Impossible Foods, Oatly, which are IPOing next year, and they've changed their tack. And a lot of that is driven by education. So much of it is driven by focus on health. Um, and I think because of that consumer trend toward more sustainable patterns of buying food and consuming food, our ETFs exist, and the companies that we invest in exist. So for us, you have to follow the consumer, and if the consumer is saying, it's important to reduce meat consumption to end things or slow things like deforestation, um, and slow things like mass health problems that we've seen everywhere on the planet, and unsustainable farming practices, then then we need to change, then we need to change the way we invest in these companies as well, and adopt a process that focuses on the solution providers as opposed to those that are kind of reactively moving into the direction, um, in the right direction. So for us, we just made the very clear decision at the top, of in the beginning of the process, to we're going to exclude companies that are exposed to land reared meats. In aquaculture, we only include companies exposed to land based fish farming, because of the problems associated with large scale fishing, and also sea based fish farming, where you have sea lice entering the environment of the salmon, and basically eating their flesh off. You have an environment in a land-based fish farming practice. You effectively a controlled environment, so you can control what goes in and what comes out. And I think this is quite important. So we've made a lot of decisions along the way to effectively build a product that best fits our definition of what sustainable food investing is. Now, that might be different to another provider. So if an investor is out there looking at 3 different funds, I think it's important to know what you want to invest in, but I think it's also important to know what you're actually investing in. So always ask those questions to the provider of the fund, or whatever other investment vehicle you're trying to access or want to access. Try to figure out what that provider's definition of sustainable food is, and try to figure out if that marries with your own view. Because I think a lot of this will be specific to the person making the investment.
Look, I'm wanting to put some. I'm a fund selector, right? So our audience is the fund selector audience of the world, the ultra high net worth investors audience. I'm a fund selector. Um, I'm looking at Nordea, or Rathbones, or KBI Global Investors, all of whom do similar things in the sustainability marketplace.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking at you guys as well. Why would we pick you over the more traditional fund route? What does buying into an ETF bring that's different to the market?
So yeah, it's a great question. It's one we're asked quite regularly. I think the short answer is price. We're always coming in cheaper than the majority of these active funds. So that's the first. The second thing is that the process itself is systematic, right? It removes emotion. It brings in an element of discipline, and it doesn't take, it doesn't trade and have a lot of turnover, as the portfolio builds over time. A lot of the time people look at the headline fee and think, okay, that's what I'm paying. In a lot of these funds, you end up having a lot of portfolio turnover. A manager picks a stock, it doesn't do well, or it breaches his risk limit. He has to delete it from the portfolio. He may not want to, but he has to, because it's a rule built into the governance process. There's a lot of inadvertent activity that kind of happens behind the scenes, and that builds into the cost, that goes into the cost that the end investor is ultimately paying. I think with the ETF wrapper, you have a very simple, low cost, accessible way to play a theme or multiple themes, excuse me, in a wholly systematic and rules based way. Now, that's not to say that every single ETF is passive. It just sits there, buys a portfolio of companies, and then does nothing for 5 years, right? That's not what's happening. these indices are systematic, which means that every 6 months, at least in the case of our indices, the portfolios are reconstituted. Each of our products is built in partnership with a sector theme expert. So somebody who's a specialist in every single theme we launch. Our medical cannabis fund has a sector expert attached to it. Our education fund has a sector expert attached to it. So the sector expert replaces the active decision maker, but the sector expert's role is to update the universe every 6 months, so that the strategy itself can remain systematic while at the same time using the expertise of the sector expert. I think that's the crucial difference. You get a disciplined process, removes emotion and behavioral biases, but you still get the sector expert at a relatively low price point. And so that's what we're offering. We very much see our product suite as sitting in between your traditional passive ETF and your active fund. It's really at that sort of hybrid point where you make the best use of the sector or theme experts' research and expertise and knowledge and company oversight, but your implementation is completely systematic, rules-based by way of an index methodology, which is also, and this is important, completely public. Everything is on our website. The portfolio is there every single day. You can see the index methodology anytime you want to see it. You can come and speak to us whenever you want, and you get direct access to the folks that built it. We make our sector experts available as well for people who are fund selectors to speak directly to the guys that sit behind the product. And I think this level of extreme transparency, I think, is why a lot of people choose the ETF as opposed to some of the other products out there. And of course, the last point is performance. You might have an ETF and an active fund that costs 3 times the price and they're performing the same, or you might have the ETF, performing much better. So at that point, it's really down to the investor to make an informed decision. Does he feel that the extra value he's getting by paying the higher price outweighs, whatever disadvantages he believes an ETF has? So I think that's a good thing to think about over time. Of course, a lot of the ETFs are newer, so hopefully we expect and certainly we believe in the robustness of our systematic investing process in themes, and I think we'll see over time how these how these products do.
Well, what a really interesting chat, and it just remains for me to say thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Thanks for having us on, and appreciate this interview. It was great to speak to you.